Hey there, fantasy owners. Welcome to Lift the Cup Fantasy, or LTC Fantasy as some call it. We're rolling along with our 21-22 team reviews. We're going to look at the Columbus Blue Jackets, see who led them in different stats for goaltenders, defensemen, and forwards. Who, for me, was the biggest fantasy disappointment? Who was the biggest fantasy surprise? And who on the roster was actually a true relevant fantasy player week in and week out? Reviews are continuing to come out every few days here, so because no better way to watch the playoffs and talk a little bit of fantasy hockey anyways. Hope you're enjoying the playoffs. Some really good series going on right now. Don't forget to subscribe. That way you can catch your favorite team's review. Maybe you want to catch your rivals' review. Maybe you want to catch all 32, or just a team that kind of gets overlooked fantasy-wise. So we'll get right into it. The goaltenders, who led him in stats, is basically Elvis Merzlikins, because, well, lack of options there with Korpisalo hurt a lot of the season there. Elvis Merzlikins did lead him in games played. He played 59 games, so he played a lot of games this year. Also led him in wins with 27, goals against average at 3.22, and save percentage at 907. Should mention that Daniil Tarasov did actually lead in goals against average at 2.4 and a 937 save percentage, but he only played 4 games, which is a very small sample size to really consider him a true leader in a stats category. Overall, Merzlikins did have a tough season. He was definitely better in the second half of the season, as he did give up 2 or fewer goals in 6 of his last 8 starts, and hopefully that carries over to him for next season there, especially if you're a Columbus fan. D-man stats, who led them? Well, we all know the big guy is Zach Werenski. He tied in goals actually with Adam Bolquist at 11. He did lead them in assists, Werenski at 37, and points at 48. Gabriel Carlsson led him in plus minus at a plus 6. Doesn't really have much for other stats to consider, but if you did need plus minus in a roto league, that might be somebody to look at next year. Hits was Andrew Peak at 191. He also led him in blocks at 169. And of course, Werenski led him in shots at 216. Not surprising there. Honestly, Werenski's the only true fantasy D-man that's really relevant on the roster. Bolquist had tiny spurts there. He is a good prospect, so it might be somebody that might jump into maybe streaming status next year. But overall, it's Werenski or nothing. Forwards, who led him in goals? Oliver Bjorkstrand, 28 goals. Jakub Voracek led him in assists at 56, and Voracek also led him in points at 62. Kind of a bad season only having 6 goals, but he did have 62 points. Plus minus was a tie between Sean Corelli and Jack Roslovich at plus 2. Sean Corelli also led him in hits at 240, which is quite a bit. Boone Jenner led him in blocks. He had 56 blocks. Get this, he only played 59 games, so almost a block per game for a forward is a lot over a season there. And shots on goal was Oliver Bjorkstrand. Of course, you tend to see a trend in these reviews. Whoever leads them in goals more often than not leads them in shots. He had 215 shots. Do mention, because he didn't lead in any stats, Laine did have a good season. He put up 56 points and only played 56 games, so he averaged a point per game per season. Jenner also had a really nice season going before he did get hurt there at the end. So overall it wasn't too bad in Columbus, even though it was a tough season overall. Biggest fantasy disappointment in Columbus? It's hard to pinpoint when they had such a rough season, but if I had to pick one, it would be Elvis Merzlikins. Goaltending was supposed to be a strength on their team, and sure, he did have 27 wins, but his goals against average was over half a goal per game higher than his career average, and his save percentage was definitely a career low for him. Biggest fantasy surprise has to be Patrik Laine. I know he only played 56 games, but it's the first time in his career that he averaged a point per game. So that was really nice to see. And if you're averaging a point per game, obviously you are fantasy relevant. We'll jump right into who is fantasy relevant on the roster. Obviously, Zach Werenski. He's very offensive defenseman. Will be fantasy relevant week in, week out. Also, Patrick Laine. He's the only player on the forward group that I would consider fantasy relevant on a week-to-week basis. If you're averaging a point per game, obviously you're going to do well. Lots of streaming options this year because in their forward ranks, they did have a lot of players that did good in spurts, like Bjorkstrand. There was Roslovich, Jenner, Nyquist, Voracek. There's a lot of different options there for you. We will be out in a few more days with another fantasy review. If you did like this one, please remember to hit like, hit subscribe, and remember that notification bell. And enjoy the rest of the NHL playoffs there, fantasy owners.